We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We are really excited to have everybody. This has so far been an excellent session. So to just give a little overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'll just go ahead and share my screen so that you can see. All right. So first, we're going to be going over our 2020 legislative priorities. Then we'll pause for a brief question and answer period. The best way to ask a question is to put it in the chat. If that's not accessible to you, you can email at emily@chesapeakeclimate.org, and I'll put that up as well. Then we'll hear from Anthony from CCAN of just a review of some essential lobby skills that we really hope for you to take to Annapolis. Then we will, after Anthony wraps up, we'll do a role play of what a typical lobby meeting would look like. We'll first start with role playing even how we would prepare for that meeting, and then jump right into a role play of a typical meeting that you would have on lobby night. And then we'll stick around for a little bit more discussion and just an overview of what we'll actually be doing on lobby day. Great, and thank you if you just joined. Okay, so I'll jump right into our 2020 legislative priorities. So I think it's important to understand the landscape that we're facing right now as we're heading into this session. We are absolutely in a climate crisis. I'm sure I don't need to say that to those of you joining, but we absolutely are running out of time, which is a really scary prospect. We need both immediate action and comprehensive long-term planning to cope with the reality of climate change. According to the 2018 IPCC report, wealthy nations need to cut emissions by at least 60% below 2006 levels by 2030 and achieve net zero emissions by 2045 in order to avoid being locked into unsurvivable conditions. And this is the truth of our current century. So that's why what we're coming to Annapolis with today, really making sure we bring that home. We also do acknowledge that some estimates are calling for reductions that are even faster than that. We are basing our goals around the IPCC because it is the best accepted science, especially very important to legislators. But we also do understand and sympathize that that there are folks that are calling for emissions faster than that. So just to review some facts about the climate reality in Maryland, we have over 3,000 miles of coastline, almost as much as California. That's according to NOAA. So that really puts us at risk as one of the most vulnerable states to climate change. We have 5 counties that are at or near sea level. We have over 68,000 Maryland homes at risk from tidal flooding, according to the Union of Concerned Scientists. Sorry about that, folks. And we have we're going to expect to see a 920% increase in nuisance flooding. We've seen that since 1960 in Baltimore and Annapolis. That's also according to NOAA, and it will continue to be a problem. And we have the highest air pollution mortality rate of any state in the country, according to MIT, and that is, of course, exacerbated by heat. If you're like me and you suffer from asthma, that is a really serious situation, and it's even worse in city centers where we see these heat islands. So we know this is a really serious problem for Maryland. So with all of that, what is our governor doing about it? We're going to watch a quick video to find out. audio. What I can do is send this along to everyone after the video, after the webinar.
There are more than 10 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded. You have been put on hold. You are muted. You can mute or unmute yourself by pressing star.
Okay. Sorry, so we're having some technical issues with the video there. I'm going to paste that link into the chat. So if anybody wants to watch that later, you can. It was something that we showed at our Rebuild Maryland conference. It's a really informative video that summarizes the points that I do have a slide about here. So I'll just go ahead and go into those. So some major flaws with the current Maryland climate plan are that it's, number one, based on outdated targets. Our current mandate is 40% of reducing our emissions by 40% of 2006 levels by 2030, with absolutely no plans for reduction after that. It supports nuclear energy. It includes fracked gas and coal as part of a 100% clean energy plan. It supports highway widening as a pathway for reducing emissions. It has absolutely no electric vehicle support. And it has no plans for expanding offshore wind or expanding solar. And it has no significant equity analysis or plans for just transition. So that is those are the major flaws. So then the big question is, what can we do instead? So to respond to Governor Hogan's flood plan, a new revised Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act is being introduced by Senator Paul Pinsky and Delegate Dana Stein. The Senate bill number on that is SB 926. We don't have a House number just yet, as of when I last checked at 4 p.m., but we'll let you know when we get that. And it takes several immediate actions, creates stronger targets, and includes equity and just transition provisions. So here's just some quick examples of what is in the new some immediate actions in the new GGRA bill. I won't go through all of these, but some of the ones that I'll highlight is that we're planning to plant 1 million trees annually for the next 10 years. We want to require that all new buildings with 25% more of state funding to be zero emissions starting in 2021 at the latest. One that I think is also going to be really visible is requiring new large commercial buildings to install rooftop solar. And another really important factor in this is requiring all state agencies to consider climate impact in decision making. That alone will have a tremendous impact in the way that we're talking about climate in the state. And a big critical headline of this bill is reforming those targets. We really want to get in line with the IPCC by setting a 60% reduction of emissions below 2006 levels by 2030, which is moving us up from our current 40% mandate, have a 100% reduction by 2045, so actually having a target for net zero, which we do not have right now, and having a check-in of those targets in 2024. We also are going to be making some changes to the planning process. So that includes a prohibition of using highway widening as a reductions pathway. So it's a really controversial part of Governor Hogan's plan, and we just want to address it very directly in this legislation. We also need to adjust the way that we account for methane. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas in the first 20 years of its life cycle. And currently we're missing in our accounting the impact of that methane. So we want to adjust how we're accounting for that. And we also want to require the use of best available scientific information. And while that might be, if you're not familiar, that might sound like it doesn't mean a lot, but that actually is a very specific legal definition which relies on precedent. And that's another big issue that we've seen in Governor Hogan's plan is relying on technology that is not really not really ready to go to market. So we've added a provision to change that as well. The bill also creates a climate justice work group, which is tasked at really looking at how climate change is affecting frontline and disadvantaged communities and how the state funding to reduce emissions is being distributed. We really don't have a lot of data on that right now, so that would be a major task of that climate justice work group. And would also create a temporary just transition task force made up of legislators, industry leaders, labor, and other representatives from the state to really work through how we are accounting for the needs of folks who might be losing their jobs from our transition away from fossil fuels. So that's all that's in the greenhouse gas reduction reform bill. We also have two more bills that we're introducing this session, or that we're supporting this session.
Hey!
Oh, wait. I don't know what's going on here with this mute. Okay. And so the we're introducing a bill to require that the Public Service Commission do a climate test. If you're not familiar with the Public Service Commission, it regulates electricity and gas supply here in the state, and it approves new and reopening facilities that generate electricity. And last year, when it approved a former coal plant repowering to gas, that being CP Crane, it declared that the commission has never required that any consideration of climate change and its effects be included in a proceeding. So we really took issue with that, and this year we're coming with legislation to require that they do in fact need to consider climate change in their proceedings. So this is just a quick summary of what that bill will do. And that is being introduced by Delegate Lord Charkoudian and Senator Ben Cramer. And we'll go through the Economic Matters Committee. And another really important priority that we're including across our lobby day is finishing the job on incineration. In 2011, trash incineration won subsidies for being a, quote, renewable energy resource. Meanwhile, in Baltimore and Dickerson, emissions by the incinerators present a major environmental injustice issue to the surrounding communities. And 2020 legislation this year by Delegate Nick Mosby and Senator Huff, will end incineration subsidies following similar efforts in 2018 and 2019. This is a really important one. If you were with us for the Clean Energy Jobs Act, you know that this was included as part of that effort. And so if you supported that legislation, we really hope that you come out and finish the job and help us end these incentives as well. And if you're in Montgomery County or Howard County, you'll also be given information about community choice energy for your legislator. We're including it in a smaller selection of districts this year, but you know, because there's a lot of support in those districts, but it is something that would affect the state. And that allows for local government choice of energy provider. So it sets up an agency where they can buy energy for themselves. That way, counties can focus on faster transition to renewables, having lower rates, or both, and it leads to local energy jobs, the creation of local energy jobs. And that's going to be heard in the Economic Matters Committee. Okay, so with that, we will go to Q&A. So, great. All right, I saw that there was one question that it was answered. Asking if the GGRA plan has any plans for carbon sequestration, that is definitely included in that provision on trees. So if you're not familiar, trees are an excellent carbon sequesterer, and we are really looking forward to seeing that go forward. To give a little bit more detail about that provision, it's not, we're working really closely with stakeholders to actually set up a planning process, because that is such a complicated task to pull off. And if you have, we can we can turn it over to our policy director if we have more questions on that. So another question is, why only Montgomery County and Howard County for the Community Choice Energy Bill? So we are definitely in support of everybody getting access to this. We've just seen that the biggest support comes from Montgomery County and Howard County, and we've had leaders willing to take that on in that area. But if there is further interest in setting up more meetings around CCE, you can get in touch with me. And we have another question just about net loss of forest cover because of how when we're planting trees and we're also trying to expand solar, that's a really important consideration. That's something that Paul Pinsky, the bill sponsor, takes really seriously, and that's also part of why we're having this this planning process that we're embarking on as with part of this the provision to plant trees. We're not going into it lightly. There's going to be a lot of discussion about that, but I think that's a really good point. And another question is, any specific just transition language, or is it just going to be a work group to be set up for now? And actually for that question, I'm going to give it over to our policy director, Stephen, who can answer that in more detail, because that's something he would know a little bit more about.
Thanks, Emily. So Stephen Hershkowitz here, Maryland Director for CCAN. Thanks everyone for taking time out of your evening to join us tonight to talk about this, and of course for participating in Lobby Night on the 17th. So for the just transition part of the bill, right now, I actually just came from a meeting with a labor union leader where we were talking about this bill. And so right now in the bill, it is a work group, because this process really does need to be led by labor leaders themselves. It cannot be climate advocates that are saying, hey, this is what we think is best for workers, and then hoping that, it's something that's supported by the folks that are actually democratically elected to represent workers in the state. So we've put in some language about how this work group could function. We're working on making that something that's accepted by the labor unions, and so we might have to see some amendments on that. I think there's some opportunity for some labor protections in the specific actions that Emily walked through, things like, when we're planting 1 million trees every year, are there jobs that could be created, union jobs that could be created in the Department of Natural Resources in planting those trees? Or when we're building new public buildings, at least 25% of the funding coming from the state that are net zero, can we put in language around what are called project labor agreements that have a lot of different protections in them, both for the community and for the workers that are participating in building these, in working these construction jobs, and making sure that they have prevailing wage and our union jobs. So there's some opportunities in there that we're exploring with labor leaders, and we're certainly open to any suggestions on how to make this as concrete as possible and not just kick it to a worker. But that larger conversation about just transition is one that is long overdue for the state. Other states like Colorado and Washington State have been ahead of us on it, and we're just trying to catch up.
Great. Okay. And I believe there's also some labor language in the climate test bill. Is that correct?
Yes.
On that actually? Yeah.
So, hello again. There is a provision in our Public Service Commission climate test legislation that not only does the Public Service Commission have to consider climate in accordance with the IPCC, but it would have to also consider best labor practices and standards. And this is something that we know that workers are going to support and come to the table to testify on behalf of. So we're really excited about, even on a bill like, just making sure that the Public Service Commission is considering all factors, that we're bringing climate advocates and labor leaders together.
Okay. Great, and with that, we will hand it over to Anthony. So Anthony is gonna walk us through some lobby skills, and if you have more questions, we'll probably have a little bit more time at the end. Okay, oh wait, let me make sure that the presentation itself is shared. You probably wanna see that. Spacebar.
Awesome, thanks, Emily. I'm going to set this up to where I'm sitting down, if that is all right with everybody. Alrighty, folks, thanks again for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it, and for joining us at Lobby Night on the 17th. My name is Anthony Field. I'm the CCAN Maryland campaign coordinator, heading up our No New Fossil Fuels campaign and Keep It in the Ground strategies. This will actually be my first lobby night as a climate activist, so I'm very excited to hit the ground running with you guys. So with that said, let's get on to our lobby training. Great, so here's a brief overview of some of the topics that we're going to cover. Essentially, we're going to talk about what lobbying is, why and how we lobby. We're going to do a brief role play scenario where a few of us are going to act out being a new lobby group, and we're actually going to lobby Emily, who's going to play our delegate during that role play. Alrighty, folks. So what is lobbying? Well, if you're here, hopefully you know a little bit about what lobbying is, but to put it simply, lobbying is actually the act of directly persuading a policymaker to take a position on a specific piece of legislation that you or your organization supports. Grassroots lobbying, which is more so what you guys are going to be doing, differs from professional lobbying in a few different ways. One is you're not a registered lobbyist with an organization like CCAN. You're not doing this for salary or anything like this. You're speaking as a citizen and a resident of your district, supporting this whatever particular piece of legislation it is. So there are many different ways to directly express your, just adding a few more folks to the group here.
Thanks for
welcome, and thank you for joining us. We're just going through a brief explanation of lobbying and what it means to lobby and how to perform on a lobby night. So as I was saying, there's a few ways to reach out to your representative. For example, there's email campaigns, petitions, handwritten letters. You can do a call-in day, for example, and then in-person lobbying. And actually, in-person lobbying is one of the most direct and effective ways to get your message directly to your representative and to ensure that they actually understand how the legislation will affect your life as a constituent, and you can give that personal touch and that personal reasoning backing why they should support this legislation, or stay at least consider supporting this legislation. A good, successful lobby night, or any lobbying session whatsoever, can only be successful if it's supported by a large grassroots movement. For example, if we had a rally beforehand or a large grassroots event of any kind supporting this lobby night, as we have in the past with the number of hearings and stuff like that we've been having, that only adds to the power that you will have on this lobby night. And the goal, aside from getting support, which obviously would be the great end-all be-all of this, is to at least ensure that they are not opposed to the legislation or the bills that you're supporting. So if you start out this conversation and the representative is initially opposed, we'd like to see them at least transition to that neutral position. It's much easier to move someone up the ladder of support, starting from a neutral position, going to generally supportive, and eventually hopefully upgrading them to a champion. I would definitely say Lori Sharkudian, who is sponsoring our PSC bill in the House, is a climate champion right now, and we're very appreciative of everything she's been doing so far. So why lobby? Well, that's what we just did. I'm sorry, it's freezing up here. There we go. So what makes a successful lobbyist? So you want to be personable, patient, and sharp. You'll want to dress nice. I was in a hoodie this morning, so don't show up in some normal casual attire. These are representatives. This is going to be a government building. We'd like to make a good first impression. And one of the first ways is doing that and ensuring that you are knowledgeable in the legislation that we're speaking about. So that includes gathering all the information materials that you need. We'll actually be providing folders for each lobbying group that'll include fact sheets and I believe bill language as well, describing the 3 or 4 bills that we'll be talking about. So you want to get acquainted with those as soon as possible. You have to be good at prioritizing. So these short. Sorry, have some mic issues. Generally about 10 to 15 minutes. So it's important to meet with your delegate lead, your district lead, and speak with your group to determine who's going to discuss what certain topic, come up with a 20-second elevator pitch, why you support whatever piece of legislation, and who's going to talk about each point of legislation as well. It's also good to have a timekeeper, someone that can keep track of the time. If the delegate says they only have 10 minutes to speak, you'll want to know to make sure to make your asks and your big, personal story presentation with enough time before the meeting ends. Also, never take no for an answer. These are political representatives. They will sometimes try and just kind of give you like an answer with a lot of words that doesn't have a lot of substance. So you want to make sure to never take no for an answer. If you can't get their full on, yes, I support this bill, or I'll sign on a co-sponsor or what have you, I'm sorry, we're not asking a co-sponsor this evening, but if they don't give you their support, you'll at least want to figure out what about the bill or what you can do to maybe get them on board to support. If they have specific concerns about a specific wording of the bill or certain aspects of it, it's good to take note of that and report back at the end of the evening, because in the end, we'd like everybody we can to be on our side. So it's helpful to know what sort of concerns the representatives have regarding these bills. Okay. So what makes a successful lobby visit? Well, you'll want to know your specific goal ahead of time. Again, that goes to reviewing these materials before you actually head into the meeting, but also knowing the particular delegate or senator you're going to be speaking to. What I do, and I know a number of us do here at CCAN, is something called power mapping. So we'll look at the delegate that we're going to be meeting with prior to meeting with them. We'll kind of take a look of their district, their constituency, what that looks like, but also what issues are important to them. So if you're talking to a specific delegate and you understand that energy is an important issue to them, then you want to kind of look at the aspects of our bill that might pertain to energy and how you can use that to tailor your pitch specifically to them. Obviously, the easiest type of delegate to talk to is somebody who's already a climate champion, in which case you can take a look at these 3 bills and present it from a climate standpoint. And it's very important to understand who you're talking to, what committees they're in, the kind of power that they hold. If they're going to be one of the key figures and key votes in committee to pass these bills in a hearing, that is something that you will like to know going in. You'll also want to come up with some compelling facts and stories. So again, this kind of ties in with the elevator pitch. You'll want a hook, a tie-in of why you are presenting these bills, why they're important to you, how they can help the issue that they're being applied for. And that leads into building a strong relationship with this delegate. Hopefully many of you who are meeting with your particular representatives already have a baseline relationship to start with, but if you don't, that's okay. This is a perfect time to start that. Introduce yourself. Obviously we don't want to take too much time on pleasantries, as this is a short meeting and we'll want to get to the meat and potatoes of it with discussing the bills, but take some time to introduce yourself, ask them for their name. If you're a student going to the University of Maryland, for example, you might want to mention that. A number of our representatives obviously have attended that college, and that's a good kind of starting basis of a relationship there. Also, you'll want to make sure that you have a strong ask. We're going to be asking these representatives to support these pieces of legislation. So be sure that you assign somebody to make that ask, as that's the most important part. That's the main reason of these meetings. But don't be timid about it. You know, we are sure of these pieces of legislation. We understand that the good that they will do, and we just want to make sure that we unequivocally ask them for their support on this legislation. And ensure you have a follow-up plan. I've been doing some lobbying in Annapolis over these bills a few times, and a couple of these delegates have had questions about certain aspects of them. So make sure your note taker, for example, takes down any questions or concerns that the delegates might have, and know who within your group is going to be the person to follow up with that delegate, whether it be by email or possibly another meeting in the future. And always have a good lead behind. As I said, we're going to be providing folders with fact sheets and all the information, and something tangible that you can give them that they'll be able to keep once you leave and review on their own time. And some potential pitfalls. So, and this is a really big one, losing your temper. I'm an activist as well, and I've spoke to some representatives who are a little hard-headed or difficult to get through to sometimes, but the important thing is not to lose your temper. These are all issues that you and I, everyone here at CCAN, are really passionate about, but we need to make sure that we keep an open dialogue. You know, if a delegate or your representative gives you some pushback, or it just seems that there's lack of concern or lack of understanding on their part, we want to try to keep that dialogue open, explain the issues as calmly as possible, and try not to get overly aggressive and defensive. That'll unfortunately shut down the conversation, and it will make things harder going forward. As said before, you want to know relevant info about your target. If you don't, you know, you have the mistake of not understanding what position they have to support the bill if they're not on one of the committees, for example. So you'll want to know that. You don't want to lose track of time before you can make the ask or hit the real key points of the legislation. So ensure that you're always keeping those items as a priority. You're keeping track of that time. We don't want to be stuck in a situation where we've left the delegate's office or the senator's office without making all of the hard asks that we need to. Don't get too wordy with things. Don't have too many facts and statistics that you're throwing their way. You know, they're no different than us. If somebody came to me and was just shouting out a bunch of percentages and mathematical figures to me, I might get a little lost, and it might kind of get the whole meaning behind the bill might get lost behind those numbers. You know, it's good to have some relevant facts and info, but I would try to keep that to a minimum. Another potential pitfall is not personalizing this meeting. You know, you are their constituent. This is something important to you. You have a reason you're supporting, you know, us on lobby night, but also this legislation. So be sure to put your own spin on things. And then make sure you ask plenty of questions. Again, this goes into some of the follow-up and understanding their concerns with things, but we want to make sure we come away with at least a general understanding of the legislature's position, whether they are at that neutral mark, if for whatever reason they are strongly opposed, or if they're someone that we can count on for their support. We want to know that when we wrap up for the evening. And then again, make sure you have a strong plan for the strong ask, or any ask for that matter. So plan beforehand who's going to make the ask, when the ask is going to be made throughout your pitch. And now we're actually going to lead into our role play example. So thank you, folks.
All right. Hello. Hi, everybody. Okay, so we are, like I said, like Anthony said, going to role play a little lobby meeting. So first, we're actually going to describe how we prepare for these meetings. So I'm going to share with you all our lobby planning template that we are going to be using this year, and we're going to go through who in our group is going to do what piece. So let me share that. Okay. So this is the form that you'll actually be getting in your packets on lobby night. So this kind of goes through how you can expect a meeting to flow, or at the very least what you want to have a plan for, and then some of the other roles that you might need to cover, even if they're not speaking a lot in the meeting. So there's kind of a role for everybody. If you have some people in your group who are maybe newer, who aren't as confident with the bill, there's still things that they can do to help out in the meeting. But generally, everybody will be paired with a district lead who should know generally more information about the bill, and we'll have some time at lobby night to get to know the other people in your group, and find out what their experiences are, how much knowledge they're coming in with, and hopefully you'll be able to really highlight all of the different voices that are there. So the introduction and meeting overview and confirming how much time you have, as well as thinking that for co-sponsorship or past support of other bills, is going to be handled by the district lead. That person is going to introduce the group as being a CCAN group, introduce themselves briefly. If there is an item to thank the legislator for, they'll thank them. We want to start that meeting off right, and then they'll hand that off then to the other members of the group. So everybody in the meeting should introduce themselves. It's, you want to know at the very least who is a constituent is a big thing that they're paying attention to, and they'll probably might want you to sign in as well. And then as some people are introducing themselves, you're going to want to pick one or two people to share out, have a little bit of a longer introduction, just to share why they're there that night. Maybe they're a student, maybe they have a really compelling story about, like last year I had in my group somebody who was a pediatric nurse. So we really made sure that, she had a lot of stories about the effects that she sees from air quality because of dirty energy. And so we really made sure to highlight her voice in the meeting. Then you're going to want to pick who is giving the highlights of each bill and making the ask. So we'll include in your packet, there's going to be the fact sheets that are there for the legislators, but we'll also have talking points that are just kind of bullet pointed for you to go through, so that you can make sure that everybody in the group has, or you have a plan for how each bill is going to be highlighted in the meeting. And the person who is going to do that highlighting, it generally makes sense in the flow of these meetings to have that person also do the ask. If you're super knowledgeable but not comfortable, there are other roles that you can take, but generally if you know the most and you're talking about a bill, it makes sense to flow right into making the ask about that bill. It's also good to designate somebody who can answer questions who maybe knows more about the bills, in case there really is a tricky question, or at the very least have a plan, like we said, for if you really get stuck on a question that you don't know, making sure you write it down, and there's a plan for follow-up there. And usually the district lead is also going to be the one to close and thank for time, and get a photo. We would really encourage you to get a photo so that we can showcase just how many meetings and how many legislators we're talking to in that evening. So then some other rules you really like, we've mentioned note takers a couple of times. We cannot emphasize enough how important it is that you have somebody take notes in your meetings. It's really important. We really need to know what happens in these so that we can also follow up in our own lobbying. You tend to have very limited time, so you want to have somebody assigned to that. And we'll have a room reserved in the House of, in the legislature where you can turn back these feedback forms. that you'll have. They're very specific in terms of, okay, did they oppose? What's the response? So you can either turn those in, or there'll also be an online link. And who is going to send the photos? So, so that you know what we're looking at. So, hi, we're back on camera now. So in our meeting, we are going to have Anthony be the lead. And then we're going to have Alyssa, who's here with us, everybody kind of scooch in so that folks can see your face. There we go. Here, Stephen, maybe you want to sit over a little bit more. There we go. Oh, there we go. There we go. There we go. Now you can kind of see us. Okay. So we've already met before, and hopefully your district lead will also have some time to reach out to you before the night, so they might know a little bit about you. But we've chosen Alyssa to give a little personal story about herself. We've chosen Stephen to do the ask on to give the pitch and talk about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act. We have given Anthony the role of talking about PSC, and Stephen the role of talking about incineration. And Stephen is also going to be the kind of the go-to person if there's tricky questions. And then Anthony will be making sure we wrap up and stay on time. So you'll have a little bit of time in your groups to get to know everybody. I do recommend, especially if you are a district lead, just making sure you understand why everybody's there. So for today, we're going to be kind of playing constituents of Adrienne Jones, who is the Speaker of the House of Maryland. So she's in District 10. So her one of the cities in her area is Reisterstown and Randallstown. So we're going to actually pretend that we don't know each other right now and give little introductions as if we were meeting each other for the first time on lobby night and finding out who has the best story. So
great. Hey folks, my name is Anthony. I'm the district lead for speaking with Speaker Jones. Are you here to lobby Speaker Jones?
Yes.
Great. My name is Anthony. What was your name?
Alyssa.
Alyssa. So why are you here today?
I'm actually a student at UMBC, so in my classes we learn about how climate change has really been seriously affecting things for social aspects and global aspects.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming out. It's going to be great to have a student with us. Thank you. Stephen, what was it?
Yeah, so I'm Stephen. I'm a high school science teacher, and I, in addition to caring a lot about the education of my students, care a lot about the future climate in which they live. And I know I try to incorporate climate as much as I can into the curriculum that we teach them, environmental literacy, and I just want to make sure that our legislators know how important that is.
Fantastic, yeah. And just a little bit about me. I'm actually new to the area. I'm from Texas, and I grew up in a kind of low-income community, mostly people of color, Latino community. We were around fracking wells and big oil in Texas, and I got to see firsthand how our health was affected by these gas infrastructure and how it's affecting the climate, hurricanes. And so now that I'm up here, I want to work as hard as I can to ensure that Maryland is a better place.
great. Awesome. Perfect. So now we know who we are lobbying with. So we've already gone over all of the different roles. That's just a really, it's important to figure out whose story you really want to highlight, especially with those limited times. So I think we would in this meeting we want to hear from everybody, but I think we'd want to hear at least 1 or 2 sentences from each person in this group, actually. With this, if you have this kind of a powerhouse of great characters.
Yeah. Funny how that worked out.
Funny how that worked out. And Alyssa, can you scoot in just a little bit? Yeah, I think we did this last year. Sure. There we go. That's better. That's better. And we'll pull the camera back so that you can see. It's not going to be as important to see me. And another thing you're going to want to do, and we'll have our lobby meeting actually start in just 1 minute. You're going to want to look at the different meetings that you have scheduled. So you'd actually have several meetings scheduled for your district potentially. So you'll want to have a plan of, okay, we're going to go to this person and this person, and plan for when you're going to have a bathroom break, for example, is a good thing to do. All right, so
And also, I'd like to say, we already had predefined roles going into this, but a part of this whole introduction process is determining who would fit best with each role.
Yes.
While we knew that coming in, be sure to identify who's going to make that ask, who's going to talk about the specific legislation.
Yes.
This is the time to do that.
Yes. So, you will have some time on lobby night, and when we conclude our role play, I will talk a little bit about the actual flow of lobby night and take some remaining questions. Okay, so I'm shortly going to become Adrienne Jones. We'll have your meeting start now. So let's say you've walked into my office. I'm Adrienne Jones.
Great. Hi, Speaker Jones. My name is Anthony Field. I'm a constituent in Randallstown, actually, and I'm here to talk to you about a number of priority bills that we're supporting. And I'm here with 2 fellow constituents of yours.
Mm-hmm. Hi, my name is Alyssa. I'm from Reisterstown. I am a student at UMBC.
Oh,
so
great.
We study a lot about climate change in our classes, actually. So we look at like the justice issues that come along with it and some of the global issues that we're dealing with as well.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm actually an alumna of UMBC, so great to have a fellow UMBC person. What year are you in?
I'm in my junior year.
Awesome. Great. Well, love the school. Love my alma mater. So thank you so much for coming out.
Well, I'm not a golden retriever from UMBC, but I
actually, it's a Chesapeake Bay.
Is it Chesapeake Bay? Oh man, well, that just shows that I'm.
No worries.
Wow, really messed that up. But my name's Steven. I'm a high school science teacher, also from Randallstown, and thank you so much for making this legislative session the session of Merit for Maryland's Children, and on all the stuff you're doing in education. And we're hoping to do, follow a similar theme and make it the session for Maryland's children in terms of their future climate that they live in as well.
Absolutely. Very important to me. I've worked with children and on education. It's always been a really high priority throughout my career. So I appreciate the work that you do. We really do want to get Kerwin fully funded this year. So, really working to support. So great.
Great. Yeah, thanks again for meeting with us. Thank you so much. Here are actually the fact sheets and the bill language of the priority bills that we're looking to support. I want to talk to you a little bit about Delegate Shakudian's PSC climate test legislation. It's actually also being sponsored in the Senate by Senator Kramer. So this is something that would introduce a really straightforward and specific fix to kind of the massive oversight that the PSC legislation, the Public Service Commission is not currently considering climate change when it's looking at applications for energy generating facilities. And, this is something that would just introduce the language and the requirement for them to consider that.
Okay. Great. All right, that's good.
Sure. Yeah, and Stephen's going to discuss one of our other priority bills.
Do you think you can support the Public Service Commission?
No? So that's coming through the Economic Matters Committee?
Yeah, it's actually being jointly heard through Economic Matters and Environment and Transportation.
And so have you talked to what has your conversations been like with the Public Service Commissioner, or what has the conversation been so far?
Sure. So I'm actually a bit unsure if how those conversations have gone. I don't want to tell you something, just make something up on the spot. But I can certainly follow up with the people behind this bill and follow up with you later.
Yeah, that would definitely be an important consideration for me. It's
Sure.
exactly how that agency has been consulted, but otherwise, I understand why climate change is important. So
yeah, certainly. So I'll be sure to follow up with you. Sorry about that.
So another bill that we are hoping that you can help us out with is updating the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act. So there's going to be a bill that's introduced by Delegate Dana Stein, I know from York County, and also Senator Paul Pinsky, called the Climate Solutions Act. And what that's going to do is it's going to, I don't know if you saw the headlines from late 2018 that we have 12 years left to cut our emissions in half. So we're now down to the last decade on that front, and we would really love for Maryland state law to recognize that leading climate science and say we have to reduce our emissions by 60% because we're one of the wealthiest states and one of the wealthiest nations, so we have to do a little bit more than that 50%, but 60% by 2030, and then reach net zero emissions by the year 2045. So this is what our leading climate scientists have been telling us. Dr. Don Bosch, who's a climate scientist here in Maryland, from former president of UMC's, University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, is supporting it. So we'd really love your support on those targets. And the bill would also do a bit of a down payment on actually getting those emissions down. So things like planting 1 million trees every year, making sure that we're increasing our energy efficiency. Due to, in part, your leadership, we have the Empower program, and we'd like to expand on that. And of course, we have to do this all in an equitable way, making sure all communities, especially those in District 10 and some others that are frontline to either pollution or climate change or have historically been under-supported, are part of this clean energy transition.
I definitely appreciate that last part. It was an important part of my career was working in Baltimore County to really focus on those issues of equity. My biggest concern when you say planting 1 million trees every year would be the fiscal note. So do you happen to, our biggest priority this year, climate is really important, but we really, really need to make sure that we fund Kerwin. So we're being very, very careful on the budget. So do you know what the fiscal note is looking like?
Well, we're still awaiting the first bill hearings in a couple of days, so haven't seen what the analysis has been on it yet. But we certainly don't want to pit our schools and where our children are learning against their future ability to have the same quality of life that we've had. And so I know that we're trying to find a revenue source or funding source for this in a fund that is specifically dedicated to energy and climate. And so I know most of the funding sources that are being talked about are going to have to go to education. That's important. Obviously, I support that as a teacher. But really, I just ask of you that if we can come up with a way to do that without taking away from Kerwin, that we don't pit those two causes against each other.
No, and I definitely have seen a lot of the student strikes. I know that there was one at UMBC. So I know this is an important issue to our youth. Generally, my position on this is whatever happens in committee. I really do defer to the leadership of the committee there. So you said Dana Stein, who's the Senate sponsor?
Paul
Pinsky. Yeah, so I would definitely defer to their leadership on that. But if it comes out of committee, I can see it as being something it supports as long as we can work out the issues there with the funding source.
And I know that was that's the way you handled the Clean Energy Jobs Act last session, and we really appreciate leadership's role in accepting the will of the Democratic caucus and bringing that to the floor. So thank you for that. And there's one other bill that related to the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Actually, one of the things that, as you know, we weren't able to keep in that bill was removing really highly polluting trash incineration from the renewable energy portfolio standard. And that's, that means that we are, as a state, saying that burning trash and all the pollution that's coming from that, all the asthma that it creates in the Baltimore area from the Willow Grader plant is clean. And we know it's not. It's time that the state reflects that it's causing damage, and we're not asking the legislature to just shut down the incinerator in Baltimore. We know there are jobs associated with that, but at the very least, we shouldn't be subsidizing it. We shouldn't be taking hard-earned taxpayer dollars and subsidizing an energy source that is costing the state money through health impacts and reduced learning outcomes from kids that are being exposed to this. So I know you're probably going to say, I got to follow the committee leadership on it, but we need some leadership on this. And
can you tell me who the sponsors are?
Yeah, so Delegate Mosby, Nick Mosby, who's from Baltimore City. So this isn't like some sponsor from somewhere else in the state who doesn't understand how, the job impact and economic impact of the plant. He's been organizing around the city and This is part of a larger zero waste platform that's being put forward by a number of legislators from across the state. And I know there's good co-sponsor support from the Baltimore area as well.
Okay, and is there a Senate bill or?
There is a Senate bill. So Senator Michael Huff.
Okay, so it's a bipartisan.
It is a bipartisan bill.
Okay.
So yeah, Republicans agree that it doesn't make a lot of sense to have taxpayers subsidize something that's creating so much damage. Yeah, there are, I believe, like around 30 co-sponsors in the Senate. It's passed the Senate before, so it really is up to the House and your leadership to try to get this done for the sake of the kids in Baltimore City who are right now facing out of control asthma rates.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you bringing that. I think it is a very important issue. I know we did a lot to expand renewable energy last year, but this is a very important issue. So I really hope to see it move out of committee. And if you guys will support it.
Certainly. And as Stephen said, thank you so much for your leadership and your courage in supporting the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And you'd be a strong ally and advocate in supporting this legislation. So thank you so much. And it's very important to everybody in the district.
And folks, I've got to get to session here shortly. So I want to thank you so much. Did you have anything else you wanted to?
Yeah, again, just thank you so much. And actually, can we take a picture, a photo before we head out?
Sure.
Great.
Why not?
We actually have
we have
a lovely placard here.
Great. Okay. And then we will take a picture.
Take a picture.
Great. All right. Just wrapping up. Very good. Okay. So, a couple things that we missed.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that's good.
Yeah, it's good. So first off, we did not do a time check.
Yeah.
Tisk. We did not do a time check. That's a really important one. So if we, we've gotten her like really close to the end of the day. Some of the meetings. So on lobby night, the session will be starting at 8 p.m. So some of the legislators, scheduled meetings at 7:30. So it's important to, they're going to be kind of walking out the door. So it is important to get those time checks when you can.
Absolutely. And for example, while this was a role play scenario, I failed to make the strong ask of whether or not the speaker supported or did not support the PSC legislation, and Stephen actually came into the rescue there. So that's one of the things is remember to make your strong ask. Another thing I will say is obviously, some of you folks might not be as well versed in the bill language and kind of the whole ins and outs of like all the backstory and all the numbers and the facts like Stephen was. He did a very good job kind of laying out the numbers and everything like that. So don't be afraid if you don't know the whole stew of information. Like I said, just tell them what you know, tell them why you personally support it, why it connects to you specifically, and then create that follow-up. Let them know that you will find that information for them and get it to them.
If they really want to know like the wonky details of like, oh, what part of the law is this going to affect, they can schedule a meeting with a lobbyist who works on this. What they really want to know is why their constituents support. So like having, and especially like having a teacher in my group, perfect. And hearing that he cares about that, and having a moment where I get to talk to a student, very, very good.
I'll put one comment out there so it goes both ways, right? So you might not have the in and out like Annapolis speak that I might have been losing in that, and it's hard for me to turn it off. But it's the same way for legislators. They're in the environment every single day. And so, like for example, role playing of Speaker Jones, she said, what's the fiscal note on this bill? The phrase fiscal note is it's a very Annapolis speak. Just means how much funding is it going to take to do this? And so, if you get asked that question, they reference something that you might not know. It's totally okay for you to say, sorry, it's like, I'm not familiar with what do you mean by a fiscal note, and you don't have to try to use context clues to figure it out.
Yeah. Generally, I think they'll understand if you're speaking with a staffer or the actual representative. They'll understand that you're a constituent. This isn't you're not, this isn't something you do on a daily basis. You don't live and breathe this legislation for the most part. So I think that they generally will try and keep it accessible in terms of their questions.
Yes. So there are a lot of questions that I'm seeing in the chat, so I'm going to take a moment to just start answering those. Okay. There are a lot of great ones. Wow. Okay, so 2 of them are actually about the bills. What entity would be coordinating and implementing tree planting, and how would it be coordinated with other entities that plant trees like Chesapeake Bay Foundation?
Great question.
Great question.
So the Department of Natural Resources, as the bill is currently written, would be the agency of jurisdiction for this plan. And we're trying to come in with some amendment language that was helped develop in part by Chesapeake Bay Foundation, where we would create, we basically give Department of Natural Resources a year to do a planning process, and we would require them to work with partners like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Nature Conservancy, League of Conservation Voters, who have experience in either direct planting of trees or doing a lot of modeling for the policy around like where the trees are supposed to go, what types of trees are best at carbon sequestration, how many trees do we need in urban areas to alleviate heat deserts and islands. And so there's a lot of different considerations that we're going to try to require Department of Natural Resources to consider. There'll be other agencies like Department of Transportation does a lot of tree planting. Department of Agriculture needs to be involved because there's a lot of agricultural farmland that needs to be preserved. So yes, there's a lot of partners, and we're hoping this planning process that's written into the law will get all of that right.
Yeah. Another question, is climate justice working group only meant to address transition and employment issues? What about poor communities most likely to be impacted by climate change? Definitely, there's going to be a climate justice work group, and then there's going to be a just transition task force.
Climate jobs, yeah.
Yeah. So there will be an examination of how climate change and how the funding that we're putting towards reducing emissions is impacting those communities that you mentioned. So it won't just be just about jobs. So these are next questions are more so about lobbying. If we're not asking for co-sponsorship, what does support look like? That's a really good point. So after co-sponsorship, so there's that's kind of like a big opportunity for a lot of people to signal that they'll vote on, they want to vote for it if it comes out of committee. But if it's going to their committee, they're going to be the first ones to vote on it. So they vote. How it works in Annapolis is the bills all get sent to different committees. If a committee decides, the committees basically decide whether something is going to be favorable or unfavorable. If it's unfavorable in committee, it's usually, that just means it's dead. So if they're in committee, they have the opportunity to vote for it and get it out of committee. So you'll see those specific asks if you are talking to somebody on committee. If they're not on committee, asking them, if it gets out of committee, to vote for it on the floor. But you can also ask them to push if maybe their colleague if they're in a co-district with somebody who's a target, or they can be a bigger champion. Stephen, do you have any other thoughts on this?
I mean, even if they're not on the right committee, they're eventually going to have to vote for it on the House or Senate floor. I think, in the role play that we were just doing with the speaker, the speaker is never going to actually vote on the bill until it gets to the floor, but has a lot of impact with the committee chairs. They have leadership meetings every week, and so most of your meetings will not be with the speaker, but but when you're in meetings with someone who is in leadership, committee chair, vice chair, majority leader, majority whip, caucus chair, there are a lot of leadership positions that create for people in the legislature. You can just say, hey, can you weigh in with the leadership team or this committee chair and say, hey, this is a priority for my constituents. I would love for you to move this bill, which means to move it for a vote. in the committee, which is important because other than it being voted unfavorable in committees, the way to kill a bill is to just never do anything with it.
Mhm. All right. The next question is, what do you do when you're the only one in the group? Well, we hope that that won't happen to you. But if you are the only one in the group, we'll you know, or if nobody else shows up from your group, I will be around to answer a lot of questions on the day. We would still encourage you to go to those meetings and just at the very least represent your views on climate change, give them the literature, and you know, see if you can ask. It depends on your comfort level. Like, we don't want you to do anything you're not comfortable doing, but if you are comfortable just taking the meeting and going with it, then we would definitely encourage you to do that.
I'll add on that as a professional lobbyist now for CCAN, there is nothing legislators love more than talking to someone that they represent instead of people like me.
Yes.
They, you know, they will make time, and even if you're just chatting about like where you live, what you do in the district, you know, who you know mutually, you know,
and that you care about climate change.
You don't need to be
You don't
well
have to
versed
be
on
well
these
versed.
issues, and as long as you can hand over the materials, you know, you're doing a huge service for
You
us.
really are. Usually, how many legislators will each group visit? Does each bill leader discuss or do an individual ask after getting? I'm sorry, hold on. Let me answer the first question. How many legislators will each group visit? It depends. We are working really hard to get as many meetings scheduled with your legislators as possible. But you have 4, so you have a senator and 3 delegates, or, well, that's not necessarily true, because if you're in a sub-district, you might have just 1 delegate. But you'll have, well, if you don't have a meeting scheduled and you have extra time, we'll give you the information about their room, and you can go to their office and drop off literature and maybe meet with staff. So it depends, and it depends, like, sometimes it's hard to get the actual legislator, and sometimes you do meet with staff. So there's another question about that later on, of just like, what do you do when you're talking to staff? But generally, to answer how many legislators will each group visit, up to 4. Up to 4. Okay. Does each bill discusser do an individual ask after going into detail about the bill? You can work that out in your group, but generally I think that the best way to do it is to have the person who discusses the bill do the ask.
And I would pause after each one to get the ask, because then if I'm being asked my opinion on 3 different things at the very end, I'm mixing up which one is which. So
yeah. Okay, the next one was about, like, how do you, it's harder to phrase your asks when you're or do your asks when you're talking to staff. They still you know, they really do represent. I used to be staff. I was staff for Mary Washington back when she was in the House, and now she's moved to the Senate. When I was staff, I couldn't always commit to, like, what, you know, position she was going to take on something. But if I'm definitely going to be taking notes, I'm going to be bringing back everything, you know, like, I'm going to be bringing that ask back to the legislator, and saying what position each person in the meeting held on, like, or what they were supporting. So I was actually staff during the fracking campaign, and I was lobbied by Mike Tidwell, interestingly, and there was a big group of people. And you know, everybody signed in, and they were there to support the ban on fracking. And I was like, well, I happen to know that she really did support that one, so they just, you know, that went really well. But if it had been other situations where it was more controversial, I would say that there were like 5 people here talking about, you know, X bill, and she'd say, okay. And that's a good situation where you want to follow up. You want to have somebody, like, get a card and say, hey, we came to your office, we support this bill. Can you, can we maybe set up another meeting or something like that? Okay. There will be somebody is asking, are there other groups lobbying the same evening? There are going to be a couple other groups. If you're free to, I mean, it is, we do our best. It is, there's a limited time in session to schedule lobby nights. But and I know some people are going to be going to other lobby nights. We try to work together, but it's also can be really a good thing when, like for example, Sierra Clubs. This question is also remarking on how Sierra Club and CCAN's asks are similar. That can actually be a very good thing. So like last year, so this year they're definitely talking about the PSC, and last year they were talking about, we were working on the Pipeline and Water Protection Act together. And it was great because there were some nights, they were like on CCAN lobby night last year, there were some legislators that just were not there that day, and then the following week they were there and they were able to meet with those people, and it just creates more opportunity. So that it can actually be a very strong positive. And what committees will these bills be going to? Let me just review all of that. Sorry. So the GGRA bill, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Bill, that is going to an EHE, so Education, Health, and Environment in the Senate, and Environment and Transportation in the House. The public. Hopefully.
we haven't found out the House assignments yet.
But it should go there.
And it's also in Budget and Tax as a secondary committee assignment in the Senate.
That's, yes, because of potential for
just how much it costs.
How much it costs, yeah. But the primary committee is really important. So in that case, the primary committee on GGRA is EHE in the Senate, and Environment and Transportation in the House, we think. The Public Service Commission bill is going to Finance in the Senate and Economic Matters in the House. And then
Environment and Transportation.
And it's also been dual assigned to Environment and Transportation. Wow, we're getting hit with a lot of dual assignments, that's right.
Which is good, because it's more likely that your meetings will have as much possible impact as possible.
That's true. And then incineration is going to Finance and Economic Matters as well. So they deal with energy matters typically. When is the lobby night? If you didn't know, it is Monday, February 17th. So it will be from, and I'll actually have a slide ready for you all with the agenda. And
that's President's Day.
Oh, can you say more about how to deal with legislators who are climate deniers or indifferent? Oof.
Don't get angry.
Don't get angry.
that was
Step
one of the
one.
pitfalls.
I've actually had meetings with. I had a meeting with a. When I was really new to CCAN, I ended up meeting a legislator from Frederick who is a known, very well outspoken climate denier. Yeah, just try to. There's a couple of different bills here. Try to find the common ground. I think if in that case, incineration is a good one to maybe emphasize more so in that meeting, because it is a bipartisan bill. And it, you can talk about things besides the climate impacts well, you can talk about things behind the climate and besides the climate impacts on all dirty energy, right? There's co-pollutants, there's a lot of other strain that introduces. I think incineration is a really good go-to one on that one. It's also, government subsidies on something that, that they might not. That's really a big argument from Senator Huff from Frederick, who is actually in the same district as the guy I was talking to, and he does not support government subsidy of certain of different types of energy. So he didn't support the Clean Energy Jobs Act, but he also did not support incentives for incineration. So
I think public health is a big.
Public
big
health
thing.
is a good fallback for those kinds of situations.
And then I would also lean into the economics of it. I mean, I think that one, we have now a lot of analysis from the Hogan administration itself, a Republican administration, that says that a lot of the measures to reduce emissions actually result in net positive output. So creating jobs, creating economic activity in the state. And if you look at the specific actions in our Climate Solutions Act bill, it's increasing energy efficiency,
That's
which
the
is
GGRA bill.
yes, the GGRA bill, which saves consumers money on their electricity bills over time. It's when you're electrifying the state vehicle fleet, which is one of the actions. That means while the state might have to pay a little bit more upfront, we're going to be saving money for the state in the long run, because these electric buses are a lot cheaper to operate than diesel buses. When we're building net zero buildings, it's a lot less energy consumption in the back end. So you're saving taxpayer money in the long run by moving to moving these emissions reduction measures forward.
Great. Yeah, so it's not always the ideal situation to be in, but there are, focus on what you can, what you do have in common. And, we do have a bill that does have bipartisan support. So just maybe spend the bulk of your meeting talking about that. All right. So now I'm gonna just pull up a slide that just gives an overview of our agenda for lobby night. So, share. So we'll be opening registration at 3:30 at Asbury United Methodist. So that is right around the corner. And you will be getting, this is not the be all end all spot to get this information. If you when you've RSVP, you'll first of all get a recording of this webinar. And if you have already RSVP'd, we will send it to you, everybody who has already RSVP'd. So you'll, it will open registration at 3:30. We'll at 4 p.m. have a little refresher presentation on the bills. So probably, similar to what the information that we went over tonight, and also just pointing out all of the points where you can find that information. Then from 4:30 to 5:15 will be time to meet with your lead. Your lead will, we're working with leads to reach out to folks early beforehand, so that you might have a little bit of time to, before lobby night to get to know them. But this will be the primary time. Then that time might get cut a little short if you have an early scheduled meeting. We don't have a lot of those this year, but there's always a possibility that the legislator says, oh, I've got to meet with you. I can only meet at 5 p.m. And it's better to take that meeting. So we'll let you know as in the lead up if you have any early meetings. But generally, you'll have this time to meet with your lead. Then at 5:15, we want to make sure everybody is on their way over to the State House. The majority of the meetings are scheduled from 5:30 to 7:30. At 7 p.m., our reservation in House Office Building, it's in the House building where all the delegates are, in room 431. We'll have a reservation there. And if you haven't left anything in the church, we'll move it there. Our reservation at the church ends at 7:30. By 7:45, you want to make sure all of your forms are turned in to CCAN. And at 8 p.m., the legislative session begins. So all of the delegates and senators have to go to the floor. So there's, no then they're gone. That's kind of the hard cutoff. And you're welcome to leave after your last scheduled meeting, or drop by our room. We'll have some refreshments. So you can either bring some refreshments with you from the church, or meet us in that room for some for some refreshments. All right, and is it a walk or a drive from the church to the State House? It is a really short walk, but if you need, if that's not accessible to you, we can work with you to make sure you get transportation that you need. If you need accommodations on that, please let us know as soon as you can. All right. One last note is that we are still looking for some district leads. So we're generally looking for some folks from if you're in Prince George's County or Baltimore City. We will, if you could reach out if you're interested. Now you've kind of seen what the district lead is supposed to do. So maybe you're feeling a little bit more confident, you can let us know. Oh, and another question just about parking. So in our logistics email on the lead up as we get closer, we will send you a list of all of the different parking locations in Annapolis. The closest one to the church is going to be the Gotts Court Garage, which if you've ever been to the League of Conservation Voters office in Maryland, it's the one that's right outside of their office. So it's right at that intersection between West Street and Calvert. So that's my favorite place to park, but there are other locations nearby that I will send in an email. All right, well, we're gonna wrap it up 5 minutes early. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us. Really, really appreciate you taking the time this evening. If you have any further questions, you can email me at emily@chesapeakeclimate.org or email Anthony at anthony@chesapeakeclimate.org. Definitely the best place to go for questions. Thank you so much, and the questions were great. Really, really good to get these questions answered. So thank you so much, and have a great night, everybody.